Welcome back to Monday Musings, a casual conversation about culture and theology. I'm Justin Ely.
And I'm Daniel Chen. We're just a couple guys talking about some stuff.
The stuff we're talking about right now is the war in Israel, between Israel and Hamas. Last week we looked at the current conflict and kind of what's going on in the area. Today we're going to take a step back, a few thousand years actually, and talk about the historical conflict in the region. So we can have a better understanding of how we got to where we are today.
Yes. I think this will be super helpful to understand the depth and the complexity of this conflict.
Sure.
I think especially for those who were born and raised in the U.S., 250 years might seem like a long time to someone who lives for 80 years.
Only for Americans, yeah.
Yeah, but that's nothing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the conflicts that we have had and have had,
Sure.
or like and do have, they're really short. They're not rooted in anything. Like we're about to see that this conflict goes like
way back.
thousands of years.
Yeah.
So, but another thing that you may have noticed is that we got a new logo. Is that the correct
We
word
did.
for it?
We did. Thank you to Olivia Davis for really bringing us up about 15,000 notches, you know?
It's like not only we just a couple guys talking about some stuff, we're just a couple guys making up some stuff in terms of logos and stuff, and now we're a couple guys and a professional coming up with some stuff.
Well, you know, the funny thing is Hillary does not like change, just about anything. She just likes things the way they are, you know? And so I showed her Olivia's logo, and I was like, I know you don't like change, you know, what do you think? And she's like, you know, I mean, your current logo is not great. And I was like, wow. So yeah, even Hillary.
Yeah, our old logo.
I like the old logo.
Oh, really?
Just so you know. You made it in Canva, right?
I made it in Canva. It took me about 3 minutes.
I think you did a great job.
Thank you so much. Actually, I guess this wasn't even our original logo. Our original logo was like the thinking man or whatever.
Yep.
And then it had
and it was off-centered, like remember?
Yeah. And then that was our second logo, and that logo looked very like early 2000s and simple. And our new logo looks very modern.
Yeah.
Which we're taking us into 2023.
Yeah, so. I mean, now that we're international podcasters with a wide audience, we have to act like it, you know.
Yeah.
So
and if you're wondering, if you're on Apple and you're like, this logo looks the same, it's because Apple hates our RSS feed. I don't understand it. We're trying to figure it out.
It's probably persecution.
Yeah, it probably is. But maybe Olivia will have fixed it by the time that this is released.
We're gonna try to break it.
Yeah, but hope. Yeah,
we'll see.
We'll see. Maybe it's the old logo forever on Apple Podcasts. I have no idea.
Yeah. But before we get to our main topic today, and after we have now finished our musings about our own logo, we want to go to the restaurant of the month. My restaurant of the month, I've said before, but I got to say it again because we love it so much, is Superica. Used to be the El Felix. There's one in Buckhead. There's one
in Ponce City, right?
I think so. There's also one by the Braves Stadium.
Yep.
And Alpharetta is the one we go to. But it's just so good.
What is it? It's El Felix until it reaches a certain level or something, and then it changes, or what?
No, the same. It was the same restaurant, but they were called different things.
And he
realized, I think, for like branding purposes, it wasn't helpful. So he just
it used to be called the El Felix.
Yeah, I was like, do you understand what the word El is in Espanol?
I know. If he was gonna do that, he might as well have made it the El Felixo, you know. But what do you get at Superica? It's delicious. If you've
it's
never
so
been
good.
There. Yeah.
So Hillary and I, we get a cheese dip every time.
Okay.
So good. And the chicken tacos al carbone.
Okay.
So good.
Do you get an extra taco? I think you taught us.
We used to, but we've been eating so much cheese dip. So much. And we also asked for tortillas with the cheese dip instead of just chips. That by the time I get to the meal, I'm basically full.
And they give you unlimited rice and beans.
You know what? They're changing this.
No.
That has upset me. They've actually changed what they bring it with, but we asked for the old rice and beans.
What did they bring you now?
The old rice and beans.
No.
Now it's like just regular black beans.
Oh.
And some, it's not refried, and then some weird rice thing. It's different, but we asked for the old stuff.
Yeah, the old stuff is so good. It's very cumin heavy. I love cumin. That's like maybe my favorite spice.
Yeah.
Cumin. And but
our kids get the they have a hamburger, and then they give them
the
popsicles.
hamburger.
The El hamburger. The El hamburguesa. I guess it'd be La hamburguesa.
2023, I guess.
Yeah, El or La, whatever you want. And then they give a little popsicle, which is nice.
Oh,
for
that
the
is
kids'
nice.
meals.
I've never taken. Yeah.
I'm
never taking my kids there.
Yeah.
Probably won't.
You know,
because that's a me and Meredith place. You know.
It is nice. Yeah, we have to, when we bring our kids, we like sit down and they're like, "Can we bring you drinks?" And we're like, "No, we'd like to order for everything right now, and please bring it out quickly. The clock is ticking." You know. So
they have the green tomatilla salsa, and that's the best.
Oh,
salsa
the green, yes,
I've ever had.
So good,
it's so good,
so good. But you don't have a restaurant of the month. You have an anti-restaurant of the month.
Yeah, we're equal opportunity here. So if you're good, we're gonna promote you, and if you're bad, we're gonna knock you down.
We're gonna destroy you.
So my anti-restaurant of the month is KFC. Now, some of you listeners are probably listening and be like, "Well, that was already on my list," but
not Daniel's list.
I grew up on KFC.
He doesn't discriminate.
I love it.
He doesn't think he's better than KFC.
But I went to this KFC Taco Bell by my house recently. And it was the worst restaurant experience I've ever had.
Wow.
You know, I walked in, and these 3 Hispanic guys were just like yelling at the manager, and the manager was just yelling back.
It's always a good sign.
I know. And she was like, "We're not giving refunds." They had made all the food wrong and all this stuff. I go to order. I try to get a water cup, which is normally free.
Naturally.
They tried to charge me $2.68 for a water cup.
Wow. Hope it's good water.
I got my food, and to be fair, I ordered, when I go to Taco Bell, KFC, I don't know if you even knew they had this. They have, because they're both Yum Foods brand. You can have like KFC, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, KFC. They're all owned by the same umbrella company.
Right.
So I get both Taco Bell and KFC when I'm there, maximize.
Efficiency.
The KFC actually was fine. But the Taco Bell portion, they put frozen lettuce on my food. I picked up the taco, and it was ice cold. I took a bite, and I was so confused. But they actually put frozen vegetables on my taco.
Beautiful.
And when I tried to tell them, the guy looked at me and said, "Well, I didn't make it." The cashier. I'm just the cashier.
It's fine now.
I'm like, "What?" I'm like, you want me to walk back there myself? There's no one else for me to talk to. Anyways, I go onto the website and tell KFC corporate,
"Hey, I'm mad."
I basically told them, "Look, I don't expect much. I've been to hundreds of KFCs and Taco Bells. I don't expect much. And this location needs to be shut down. It's just never been good, and it's just gotten worse since I've lived here." And I told them this is the worst experience. They sent me a gift card for $10. My meal was $12. They sent me a gift card for $10. And so I emailed them back. And I was like, "I'm not going back to KFC. I'm not even going to use this." And I was like, the lady was Courtney. And I was like, "Courtney, I just wanted to let you know. I was I told you this was a horrible experience. I don't want the $10. I want you to go in and change the franchise owner or something. Change something.
I want justice.
Yeah. So anyways, I said, this was a slap in the face. I was like, do better. I haven't heard from them since, but don't go to KFC. It's just not a company that's going to treat you well.
Man, talk about the unrestaurant of the month.
I get why people go to Chick-fil-A now. You know what I mean? They always right their wrongs. They almost never make it any wrongs.
That's true. So,
man,
wow. Well, transition from that to this, So we're going to give a historical overview of kind of the conflict that's going on in Israel. Most of this data came from a video on YouTube, which we'll post on the show notes.
Yeah.
But so let's travel back in time. So we have to go all the way back to around 1800 BC when Abraham settles in Canaan?
Yeah, so this history, I guess think two things with us. One, we're trying to answer the question, whose land is this?
Right.
And then the second is, where did this conflict come from?
Why is there all this fighting?
Right, and so we're going to start in 1800 BC, where Abraham settles in Canaan.
And God made a promise to Abraham. The three pieces of that promise was land, seed, and blessing. So he promised him the specific land with specific boundary markers to his seed. He promised seed, a lot of descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and blessing, that those who he'll bless Abraham, and those who bless him will be blessed, and those who curse him will be cursed.
Yep.
Of course, we know, and we'll circle back to this at the very end, but God promised Abraham seed, descendants, and that promise did not come to pass for quite so many years. Abraham decided to take matters into his own hands, and he slept with his maidservant Hagar, where Ishmael was born, and then God said, no, the promise is going to be through Sarah, and through Sarah comes Isaac. And so much of this conflict goes back to two half-brothers. It's really fascinating to think. I mean, you and I were talking about this before we started recording. I mean, so much of this conflict comes to one man who decided to take matters into his own hands, Abraham. So pretty crazy when you think about it.
Yeah, you can read this in Genesis 21, and you basically have the promised son, Isaac.
Yeah.
And then you have Ishmael. But I guess if you were Muslim, you would see it the opposite way.
You do, absolutely.
Which is
just like, here
really
we are.
Complicated.
Yeah.
It's like, which worldview are you starting from,
yep.
right? And so, but obviously we're Christians. We start with
right.
the Bible,
right?
Which this is, the Hebrew Old Testament.
Yep.
And so we would say from the very beginning that land was, I guess, occupied by Abraham.
Right.
I guess if you're a Muslim, you would trace that all the way back and say, see, Abraham's our father. This is our land.
Right.
But the reason I disagree with that is because right after Abraham settles the land, it is the Jewish people. I guess there's no Jews at this time because Abraham, I guess, wasn't like a Jewish.
The Canaanites that are there.
Yeah.
But then you have Abraham has Isaac. Isaac has Jacob. Jacob's renamed Israel.
There you go. And then Israel. Yeah.
One of his sons is Joseph, right? So the Joseph becomes basically prime minister of Egypt. During the famine, the family comes back into Egypt to settle into Egypt. Eventually, Exodus picks up that there's a Pharaoh who didn't know of Joseph, and he oppresses the people of Israel and puts them into slavery. God sends Moses to come in. So at this point, we're around 1300, so we're around 500-ish years after Abraham. Moses leads the people of Israel out to the promised land, like the land promised to their forefather Abraham. And, Moses isn't allowed to go in, but Joshua brings him into the land, conquers the land, the Canaanites. They settle in the land for a period of time after the conquering done by Joshua. They're ruled by judges, and then God eventually raises up, a little bit before 1000 BC, Saul as the first king that kind of unites the tribes, right? And then after Saul is replaced by David. And then David is replaced by Solomon, who is the last king of the United Empire, north and south. And Solomon builds the temple.
Yes. Which
is the location of the temple is currently where the Dome of the Rock is.
Yep.
Right, which is the Muslim site. So
yes.
You got huge historical tensions here.
Yeah, and a couple things to recognize here is, once again, as 21st century Westerners, land is not that important to us. It's just a piece of property to us. But land especially in the Old Testament was incredibly important, right? You take first the Garden of Eden, it was holy land, right?
Right.
Why did Adam and Eve have to leave the Garden of Eden when they sinned? Because they were no longer holy and cannot be in the Holy Land.
Right.
Then you see that the area of the Promised Land was the Holy Land. The Holy Land, and God resided in the tabernacle when the temple was built. That was considered the Holy Land. If you look at the descriptions of the temple, it mirrors a lot of what you see in the descriptions of the Garden of Eden because it's holy.
Sure.
Leading all the way until Christ comes. And now when he says that we are the temple, it means now we are, in a sense, the Holy Land. So now we don't consider the same physical land as holy. We consider the people of God, the church, holy, right? But you have to understand, especially for Muslims as well, that idea of Holy Land is still held as in the same way, right? This is holy. And if you are a Jewish person who even comes and occupies that land, you are desecrating.
You're defiling it.
You're defiling it, right? And so once again, you got to understand that there's kind of these complex issues that we don't necessarily understand as Westerners that they would see in a different way.
So around 922 BC, so after Solomon dies and his son takes over, Israel and Judah split. So Israel becomes the northern kingdom, Judah becomes the southern kingdom. And then in 722, Assyria invades the northern kingdom, takes them off into exile. In 597 and in 586, on two different occasions, Babylon comes in and takes people out of the southern kingdom, Judah, into the Babylonian exile. So here you're kind of into the realm of the latter half of the Old Testament. Israel's in exile, and the land is controlled in part first by Assyria, then by Babylon.
Yeah, and if you're reading through the scriptures, this is where we're going to get into the major and minor prophets. That's all during this time. Kings and Chronicles are leading up to this event.
Right.
And so, even, as you read through the Bible, it does progress kind of semi-chronologically. That as you get to the end half of the Old Testament, it's around this time.
Right.
Where they're taken away now that they've returned.
So 538, they return. The edict to return is given. And so for a while, they're kind of ruling their land, but kind of under the control of Babylonian Empire or Persian Empire.
Yes.
And then Persia's eaten up by, it becomes Medo-Persia, and then Greece.
Yeah.
And then by 63 BC, the Roman Empire has taken over.
Yes.
Rome is in control of
this whole region.
And would it be called Palestine at this point yet? Do we know?
Okay, so this is something that I looked up, and it's like, okay, I remember after we recorded last week's podcast, I was like, I keep using the word Palestine and Palestinians. I wanted to make sure I'm using this correctly. So Palestine refers to the land that's in that region of where we would now call Israel.
Sure.
Right? And so it would include like Israel, Gaza, West Bank, Jerusalem. This is all Palestine. It comes from the root word Philistia, where we get the word Philistines that the Greeks used to describe the people who were living there at the time. So Palestine refers to that region. And Palestinian refers to the people who live there. So you can have Palestinian Jews and Palestinian Arabs. But mostly now in 2023, when we talk about Palestine or Palestinians, we're normally talking about the regions of Gaza, West Bank, and Jerusalem.
Yeah.
When we say Palestine, and the news says Palestine, and Palestine is attacking or Palestine thinks this, that's generally what they're talking about. And then Palestinians are generally talking about those people, those Arabs who live there.
Yeah.
Although technically Palestine is that whole region where Israel is, and Palestinians can define both the Jewish people who live there and the Arabs who live there.
Yep.
And Arab is even more broad, right? So technically you can have Palestinian Christians. There's Christians who live in the area. You have Palestinian Christians, Palestinian Muslims, Palestinian Jewish people. That kind of describes the religion, but then you have Israelis, then you have Palestinians who live there, and that's mainly talking about the Arabs who live in those regions that I said, Gaza, West Bank, Jerusalem.
Well, I mean, at least it's simple.
Yes. So I don't know in 63 what Rome would have called it.
Right. But Rome is ruling over, the area. This is a region that they control, and we know the Roman government liked to rule indirectly. So if you read the Gospels, right, much of the Sanhedrin and the high priest of the time of Jesus's day were kind of put in place by Rome.
Yes.
King Herod was put in place by Rome.
Yeah.
And so they rule indirectly. Pontius Pilate is governor of the region.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so when you read the Gospels, many of the Pharisees are very much interested in one of the things we kind of miss in the discussion about legalism in the Gospels is that the Pharisees were convinced the reason God has not brought about these glorious promises in the prophets is that we have not obeyed the Torah correctly. And so we need to give strict obedience to the Torah, and out of that obedience, God's going to bring about his promises, namely in the current context, to get rid of the Romans.
Yes, yeah. And they thought that's who the Messiah would be.
Yeah.
Is a warrior king who
Right.
would overthrow.
So even this land promise and land hope is still central to their thinking, and they're still thinking at this point, how do we get the Romans out? That would have been out of the land. They're desecrating the land.
Right.
You had, back when the Greeks were in charge, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, he came in, a Seleucid general, desecrated the temple, sacrificed a pig, the most unholy animal in Old Testament law, on the altar of the temple to Zeus.
Right.
And so you had this just national trauma that existed. So the idea of the land being defiled by the Gentile was kind of key in their thinking in Jesus's time.
It's so funny talking about history to how quickly things can change.
Sure.
In history.
Yeah.
Right? I think you're saying all the stuff that's happening in we read in the Bible and
Yeah.
how historically things change. And I'm thinking Alexander the Great, the Greeks took over that region in
Right.
330.
Yep.
Now this is 62. You're talking about 250 years.
yeah.
And everything has completely changed.
Yes.
Rome in 330 is not even
Yeah.
a powerhouse or
Yep.
anything.
Yep.
Now they control
everything.
so much of the known world,
Yep.
right?
So now we fast forward to 600 ADs. Islam takes root around 600, right?
Yes.
And then we have the Arab conquest.
Yes. So between, we're doing broad histories here, right? So
Yeah,
not
we're
specific
skipping
dates.
700 years just about.
Yeah. So between, Rome kind of has control of this area, and then slowly they kind of lose power over time, right? But it's really the next main event.
Right.
Is in the 600s, the Arab conquests happen. They build the Dome of the Rock on the location of the old Jewish temple, which now it's okay, who does that land belong to? Whose holy land is that?
Right.
The Jewish people would say, that's
It's ours.
ours,
Yeah.
right? And still, and I don't know if you know more than me. Have you been to Israel?
I have. Yeah.
Okay. The Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, that's still there, right?
It is.
It's kind of they're on the same.
It's very interesting. So it's the Western Wall of the old temple, and people still go and pray there. And yet right next to it is the Dome of the Rock, where when we were there, they would not let my mom in because she was wearing a cross necklace.
Interesting.
They told her, take that off if you want to come in here, because the more Muslims are guarding the site. And she was like, no, I just won't come. It's good for you, Mom. But it's tense when you're there. I mean, you can feel the tension.
Yeah. How close is it?
Very close.
Okay.
And walkable.
That's crazy.
I mean, it is just, it's strange.
So anyways, then like the Arabs kind of take control of this region at this time. In the 11th century, the Seljuk Turks start oppressing people in that region, like taking it over. And so Christians in Europe are like, well, no, we're not gonna allow that. And that's when the first Crusades start.
Okay.
I think there was 11 Crusades.
Man, we need to do a podcast series on the Crusades.
Yeah. So anyways, the Crusades, okay, obviously anything with battle and war, especially we look 1,000 years back, some of the stuff that there was atrocities, it looks terrible.
Sure.
But the Crusades, like, at least from the Christian perspective, the first two Crusades weren't like greedy white Christians. Like, that's how it's portrayed now.
Sure.
Trying to take people's land or whatever. It was like the Seljuk Turks were doing like horrendous things to the people there. And so
they're going in to defend them.
They came in to defend them.
Yeah.
Right. But, you know, I think there was 11 Crusades. I think a lot of the next 9 Crusades
they get progressively worse.
They were bad, and the reasons were bad.
Okay.
But the first two were not. But it's interesting to note in history, like, there is nuance to this.
Sure.
It's not just like, you know, everything is painted. We talked about this in the critical theory. Everything's painted like, if you're a white male Christian, this is what you do or whatever.
Right,
and it's
right.
like, you can't look at history through that lens. You have to see what was really going on.
Right. Okay, so that Crusades are going on, and then in the 1500s we get to the Ottoman Empire.
Yes, and the Ottoman Empire kind of controls this land between 1500 and the 1900s.
So let's just quick recap. Right, we've gone from the Canaanites,
yes, who no longer exist,
to the Israelites,
yep,
to being Assyria and then Babylon,
yep,
and then
controlled
by, and then Persia, and then Greece,
and then Rome,
and then
Arabs,
Crusades, back and forth,
and then Ottoman Empire.
I
mean, we're talking like 10 different people have controlled this area.
Yes, I don't know why it's so complicated. Who has the land? So from the 1500s to around 1900, the Ottoman Empire is in control of the region.
Yes. And during the 1900s is when we mentioned this idea of Zionism starts, which is the Jewish people who have been dispersed a lot through Europe, but some in Egypt and some in the Middle East are now getting together. And it's funny. We talked about this. I keep using the word funny. It's not funny.
Interesting.
It's interesting. The Jewish people throughout all this time are just constantly oppressed.
Sure.
You know, not always, not 100% of the time of every year, but just throughout history. And so they start kind of clamoring, we'll
go back home.
Yeah, we want to go back home. We want our own nation. And it's amazing. And this is why I'm not 100% fully amillennial, because
it's just nuts.
You know, it's anecdotal. I don't get this from the Bible, but the fact that a Jewish Israeli state still exists after all this is amazing.
Crazy.
Yeah, it makes me wonder: is God's hand in this?
Sure,
because there's almost no other explanation besides that.
Yeah, when's the last time you've gone to lunch with a Babylonian,
right,
or a Canaanite, or an Amalekite,
right?
But you can go to lunch with an Israeli.
You can. You
know?
Sure can.
You can go up to Jerusalem Bakery, one of our restaurants of the month here,
right,
and have a great lunch.
And I just want to say that's not a great way to determine your theology.
Right.
I'm just saying. I'm just looking anecdotally and just saying I'm not sure what's going on.
Yeah.
Like this, it's amazing.
I'm with you.
Okay. So in the 20th century, Jews start moving back to the region.
Right.
So you're talking early 1900s, late 1800s. Jews start moving back to the region. The Ottoman Empire collapses after World War I.
Mm-hmm.
And after World War I, the British and French, but mainly the British, control this territory now.
So now it's moved hands again.
Yes. Yeah. So now
new landlord.
Yeah. And now we're getting into what I guess we would call like more modern, like
sure.
very like this is starting to affect us.
Yes.
So they came up with something called the British Mandate for Palestine in the Balfour Declaration in 1923.
Okay.
The British have basically promised that a Jewish nation will exist in that land that they control.
Okay.
Right? So it's like, you can say whatever, Palestinian Arabs currently live there, but Jewish people are also now living there.
Right.
But they're a smaller population than the Palestinian Arabs. But it's all controlled by the British. It was controlled by the Ottomans. It's now controlled by the British. And the British have said, we're going to give you land specifically to basically remake in Israel.
Right.
And this was in 1923. In the 1930s, there was some limited Jewish immigration to the area. But this is when the battles between the Palestinian Arabs and the Palestinian Jews start.
Okay.
So there's no official armies that I can understand. They start to form militias in the 1930s, and they start to like battle over this land.
Okay.
So this is like modern conflict started in the 1930s. The conflict really goes back to 1800 BC, right? But the modern conflict started about 100 years ago, where the Arabs and the Jews formed their own militias and started attacking each other.
Okay.
In World War II, the Jews flee Europe, obviously, because of the Nazis and the persecution that they face. In 1947, after World War II, there's two states in Palestine. There's the Jewish state and the Arab state. The British still control this technically at this time.
Well, and if I understand correctly, right, this is a United Nations declaration in 1947 to create specifically a Jewish state.
Yes.
And I mean, you're just off the tail end of the horrors of the Holocaust.
Yes.
The extermination of 6 million Jews. And so the world is saying, let's make sure this never happens again. And one of the ways we're going to do that is to create a Jewish state.
And remember, in 1923, the British had already promised it. And now it's like, okay, we really got to do this.
Of course we have to,
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And the thing is, the Jewish people in that region made up a third of the population, but they were assigned basically 58% of the land.
Okay.
And so the Arabs were like, no.
Not fair. So, but what we have, right, is this declaration. The Jews get a lot of what we'd consider modern Israel. The West Bank and Gaza are forming a Palestinian state, if I am remembering correctly, and Jerusalem is an international district.
So
Jerusalem belongs to neither, according to this 1947 declaration.
Yes, I think so.
Right. So
that's
I mean,
when that started. So this is where
But the Jewish people are getting, like you said, they're getting 60% of the land when they're about 33% of the population.
Yeah.
So the Arabs perceive that to be an unfair deal.
Correct. So in 1948, the British are like, all right, guys, I'm out.
We're out.
Yeah. And so like a lot of people blame Britain to be
Sure.
like, you should have stayed in the land and like
kept order.
like people are like, get your family in order, Britain.
Right.
And
Yeah.
Britain's like, no, thanks. Like,
Hey,
this
man,
is
we're not
too
the
much.
empire we used to be.
Yeah, we're out, guys. And I just want to say, we're going to get to this at the end. It's like, it's so easy for modern people to point fingers in the past, but part of life is just history unfolds itself in a certain way. And you know what we can't do? Go back to 1948 and change it.
No.
Like, even if we had a time machine, how do you change that? You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
This is just how history unfolded itself.
For sure.
And then in 1948 is what is called the Arab-Israeli War, where Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, and Lebanon. I'm sorry, maybe it's Iraq. If I say Iran instead of Iran, it's because I grew up in the South or whatever. So
You mean Iraq instead of... Wait,
Iraq.
you said...
I said Iraq.
Oh, yeah.
Is it Iraq?
Iraq and Arabs?
Yeah, I just, I grew up in Georgia, so this is how I learned it, So I apologize for my pronunciation of some of these places. So they decided they wanted a unified Palestine, and so these Muslim countries.
And what they mean by unified Palestine is no Jewish state.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
And so the five of those countries that surround Israel attacked them, and they lost.
Incredible. Again, it'll make you not an Amil guy.
Yeah. And so Jordan was in control of the West Bank and Jerusalem.
But Israel didn't just defend themselves; they expanded their territory.
Yes.
So they went. Mm-hmm. So it's like 1947. The plan was two-state solution.
Right.
And Israel's like, okay, thanks for the land.
Right.
1948. Everyone around them tries to invade them.
Right.
And destroy them.
Yep.
And Israel goes, no. And they not only defend their territory, they push it back and they go, okay, no more two-state solution. We're taking over the whole thing.
Yep. And then this is called the Al-Nakba, which translates to the catastrophe, because 750,000 Palestinians were displaced from their homes.
So it's called the Al-Nakba by the Palestinians.
Yes.
Right. And this is, again, it's the whole perspective thing. Their perspective, this was traumatic. Almost 1 million people displaced from their homes. The Israelites, they're not calling it a catastrophe. I don't know what they call it, but it was a great victory for them.
Yeah.
People tried to wipe them off the map again, and they succeeded. So they celebrate 1948, whereas the Palestinians mourn it.
And I'm sitting here like, look, 5 of you gang up to try to defeat this one little state.
Sure.
And you can't, and you lost your land. I'm like, I don't know. That doesn't feel good. That's not a feel-good story.
Sure.
But that's literally how history plays itself out always.
Right.
Right? We're going to talk about kind of
what
the victor. To the victor goes the spoils. That's
right.
That's how life has worked.
So it's like, okay, if Egypt and Syria and Iraq and Jordan and Lebanon hadn't invaded Israel in 1948 to try to destroy them, would there be a two-state solution today? Maybe. We'll never know. But Israel responds to this, aggression, and they're successful.
Right.
And so they say, you know what? No more two-state solution. We're taking more territory.
I think in 48, Jordan and Egypt Egypt still had some control over Gaza.
Okay, gotcha.
And Jordan had some control over Jerusalem.
Okay, got it.
And so it wasn't completely out.
Okay.
But Israel got way more land.
Okay, so that actually brings us to the 1967 Six-Day War.
Yeah. And if you're confused, this is confusing, right?
Yes.
And so we're trying to get our timeline in order too. So Jordan, Syria, and Egypt once again try to
learn your
attack
lesson.
Israel. And Israel wins again. I actually remember in high school, my Israeli friends, obviously this is biased from their perspective, but it's funny, they learned in their history growing up, just like, they were like, I don't remember the exact numbers, but they were like, yeah, we were outnumbered planes 6-1. And there's these stories of these Israeli fighter pilots that outmaneuver 10 Arab pilots and shoot them all down. And
it's crazy.
And I want to say that sounds crazy, but there's
no other explanation.
There's no other explanation that they won.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And so Israel now takes the land from Jordan and now have kind of full control of what's called Golan Heights, which is north of Jerusalem, Jerusalem, and then Gaza.
Right. Okay.
And they actually got control of the whole Sinai, I guess.
The Sinai Peninsula.
I think the guy was saying Sinai or something. I don't know. Sinai. And but it was given back to Egypt. That Sinai was given back in 1979 in the Israel-Egypt peace treaty.
Okay.
And so since then, I think Egypt has been fairly cool with Israel.
And that would have been, I think, brokered by Jimmy Carter.
Oh, okay.
I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so Palestinian Arabs were not allowed to return to their homes. So even more Palestinians get displaced. But you got to think, Palestinians are they took our homes. But I'm but you guys attacked Israel
right.
and then lost your homes.
Right.
There's kind of a difference between
Sure.
Nowhere here has Israel, the Jewish people, in a sense,
been the first to fire the bullet, so to speak. Yeah.
Now you might say, well, the Jewish people were coming back, but I'm you kind of blame Britain for a lot of that.
Sure.
Because the Britons controlled the land.
Yeah.
It's not even the Palestinian Arabs controlled the land.
Right, it was Britain.
Controlled the land. They were just kind of letting whatever happened, right? Well, because I will say one thing, people are not good at understanding other people's culture in history or now. And I would guess this is just kind of part of it. It's like,
Sure.
This isn't how we do things in England. What is happening here?
Right.
And they pull
They're
out,
like, we're leaving.
Yeah. And then after the 6-Day War in 1967 comes the first Intifada Accords and the Oslo Accords starting in 1971. So after this, the PLO, which stands for the Palestinian Liberation Organization, was founded in Cairo and was created to liberate Palestine. And they started to attack Israel from Jordan and Lebanon. And this is really when the modern terrorist attacks started.
Okay.
And so Israel invades Lebanon in 1971 to kick out the PLO.
Again, what you gonna do? I mean, sorry. So I know I'm showing my bias here, but you know, I mean, they're responding to aggression.
There's all these terrorist attacks. Like, okay, it's not like anyone's hands are clean in the situation.
Yeah.
But if you take a 30,000-foot view of this, there's no mention of Israel sending terrorists into these other countries to try to take more land. Right? It's the only way they've gotten more land is given by the UN and British, and then
they're responding to attacks or aggression.
Yeah, it's like, well, you keep attacking us and losing, so I guess we'll keep.
We'll take it. Thank you.
Yeah.
You know.
So
yeah.
And then after this, they kick out the PLO, but then they agree to share land in the West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem. But many Jews still controlled it. We're going to fast forward to 1987. There was like a car wreck in Gaza. There was like a Israel military something and some civilian truck like collided. And then that one little event sparked like, just like not a war, but conflicts, like more terrorism, like people attacking each other. And so the Oslo Accords were signed between Israel and the PLO. And then in the West Bank, this is like where Jerusalem is in that area. They agreed that there'll be 3 sections: a Palestinian-controlled section, a mixed section, and then an Israeli-controlled section. But over time, Israel just took more and more. The more Jews just kind of settled, and expanded, right. In 2000 was the second Intifada. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm sorry if I'm saying it wrong.
To Intifada, according to the Google, Intifada is an Arabic word that literally means shaking off, and in the Palestinian context, it's referred to mean as a civil uprising.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So there were issues about the status of Jerusalem, who controlled it, the rights of refugees, and increased settlement of Jewish in the area in Palestinian lands. And then in 2000, Ariel Sharon, I don't know if he was like the prime minister. He was the
Israeli prime minister.
He visited the Temple Mount, and this is when the Intifada came. Like,
that was viewed. Yeah, you're desecrating it.
Yeah, you're desecrating it. Once again, something we probably don't understand. Like, it'd be like, I don't know, a British person shows up at the White House and we freak out. Like, we don't get that. You know what I mean? Because we don't have the same. We
beat you guys. Get out.
Yeah, we don't have the same context for these things.
Yeah, right.
And then Israel decides we're just going to pull out of Gaza.
Okay.
So Gaza is no longer controlled. I don't remember what year it was, but I did read. Then Gaza elects who is going to rule them, and they elect Hamas.
Yes.
And so, like, you think, okay, like, are these Gaza citizens completely innocent that they don't want to see Israel destroyed? They elected Hamas.
Right.
Like, it's not Hamas took over.
Right.
They elected them, which is crazy.
I think that is a very legitimate critique.
So 2007, the Israel conflict with Hamas. Hamas gets voted in by Gaza. Hamas is a Sunni Muslim group dedicated to destroy Israel. Like, that's like their mission statement.
It's like their party platform.
Yeah, like, we're going to wipe out Israel.
Yeah.
Like, and so that's something to understand about Hamas as well. This isn't like we're going for peace. Like, their idea of peace is no more Jews.
Yeah, their idea of peace is not like, hey, could you give us the West Bank and Gaza? Like, we want to fight to... We want to go back to the 1947 map.
Right.
That's not what they're interested in.
Yeah, they want no more Israel.
They're a one-state solution.
Yeah.
No Israel.
No Israel. Yep. Hamas splits from the PLO and the Palestinian Authority. So now you kind of have like these different groups and views of things. But
Sure.
Hamas is more extreme
Right.
than these other groups. Israel during this time puts Gaza under blockade and kind of like make sure they can't thrive in any way.
Right.
But it's because Hamas wants to destroy them. So it's like, okay, Israel's not letting the people in the Gaza Strip flourish.
Sure.
But they're all occupied by Hamas, who wants to see them all dead. So it's like,
from a Palestinian perspective,
yeah,
you're being an oppressor. You are preventing us from flourishing.
right.
From an Israeli perspective, you just voted in a terrorist organization as your governing authority, and their like mission statement is to destroy us.
Yeah, and if we let you flourish, you will grow strong enough
Right.
to destroy us. So
yeah.
we're not gonna like support our own destruction.
Right.
Is from an Israeli perspective. There's these times. There's a lot of attacks like back and forth. And then in 2014, Hamas and Fatah reach a unity government. I got this from the video. I don't know who Fatah is or where they came from, but Hamas agrees with the other Palestinian Muslims organizations in this area, and they reach. I don't even know if I spelled that correct. So if you're looking it up, but that's what they said. Hamas now has like some allies in the area. Essentially,
Right.
is what you can get. In 2018, the U.S. Embassy relocates from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. This is a huge deal because the Palestinians
Fatah was the sole governing party of the Palestinian political arena until the first Intifada.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
So it's basically reconciliation within a political parties.
Yep.
Yeah.
The U.S. Embassy relocates from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. This just doesn't sit well with Palestinian Arabs and Muslims. You got to remember, we talked about this last time. One of the reasons that Americans support Israel is because like the rest of the Middle East hates the U.S. Like, they hate us, right? And so the U.S. moving from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which is like a contested city,
Right.
is kind of, the U.S. is saying this is Israel's.
Right.
And that's not cool. So it's like that to the Palestinians. So like, first of all, like Israel and U.S. in many ways are like tied together in the minds of this region.
Right.
Just something to understand.
Yeah, for sure.
In 2020, not necessarily this conflict, but the Abraham Accords, that was like put together by Trump, if I'm not mistaken.
It was Trump, and specifically his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, had a lot to do with it. But yeah, it was overseen by Trump.
There was peace between Israel and the UAE and Bahrain. I only put this in here to say that actually a lot of these nations now are like neutral towards Israel. I don't know the right word. They're like not actively trying to destroy Israel.
Well,
right?
and you know what's interesting about the Abraham Accords is it was actually capitalism that did it. The normalizing of relationships, it ended up being about money. It ended up being about normalizing trade. And so you can't freeze someone out and pretend they don't have a right to exist that you want to trade with and do business with.
Right.
And so opening the doors to business is really what led to this.
Yeah.
And so like on a purely like a base human level, like war is bad for profit, except for a small group of people in the like industrial military complex. But for everyone else, like if your homeland is a war zone, the stock market's not doing too great,
right?
You know, so if you encourage free trade and kind of these kind of things, you don't want to go to war with people that you are making money from and they are making money from you,
right?
And that's a little bit behind the Abraham Accords.
Yeah. And then in 2021, there was another peace deal between Egypt and Qatar and Israel that the UN kind of helped put together. Yeah. And it's interesting. Even, you know, I sent Justin you an article that happened maybe 2 weeks ago when all this happened. But Jordan and Egypt came out and said, we're not going to allow refugees to come into our country because they didn't want Hamas to come into their countries and get into this conflict.
Right.
Like they were like maintaining the peace.
It's interesting.
And
very different than it would have been. I mean, all those times they tried to invade Israel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not the same anymore.
And what I'm saying that's interesting is a lot of these other countries have, at least in this time, I mean, I can't speak for 50 years from now, maintained some sort of peace with Israel.
Yeah.
But it's like it's like Hamas and these Arabs right there that are kind of causing all this. It's very interesting.
Yeah, for sure. So this brings us to today.
Yeah.
And so that, I mean, that you go back 1,800 years and
4,000 years.
So yeah, sorry, it's 1,800 BC, 4,000 years, and that's a complex history. And so I think the first thing I'd say is it's just not simple. But also, like, we were talking before we recorded and mentioned it a few times in the podcast. When you look at history, to the victor goes the spoils. And I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that's what it is.
Yeah.
So who does the land belong to? The Canaanites, the Israelites, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Ottomans, the British?
Yeah, how far do you want to go?
How far do you want to go?
Yeah.
And history has played itself out the way that it has. You can't go back and change things.
Right.
And so, yes, Israel has a right to this land and a right to defend it.
Because they were
because that's how history played itself out.
Yeah,
it's their land.
They like from an international standpoint were given that land by the UN, and the people who controlled it over the time
decided to give it to them.
Different nations declared war on them, which I think is, I don't know, fair is the right word. Like that happens. Like if you don't like that, you declare war.
Sure.
Then you lost. You lost twice.
Right. So
and Israel won twice.
And there were consequences to that.
And so I'm like, this is how anything has happened in all of history. That's how people owned land over history.
Right.
Is that if you disagree on who owns this land, you fight for it,
right.
And then you have the winner has the land.
Right. It's like not saying that's right. It's just it is what it is, you know.
And I think what's interesting is, and I told you this, I think the reason a lot of people have a problem with that is because we have a society that we base right and wrong based on feels.
Sure.
Does it feel right?
Yeah.
Does it feel wrong? And it's kind of like I was telling you about The Office, where it was like Michael's like, Stanley, if you don't get healthy, you're going to die alone in your apartment. Are you okay with that? He goes, well, I'm okay with the logic of it. And it's like, that's almost what this is. It's like, I don't know.
Right.
I don't like when, like, war, I don't like war. Like, I don't like innocent people dying. But I'm okay with the logic that it happens. Because this is how it plays out.
Right.
Right? And you take even this, it's like, even if you say the original owner of the land should get it. But I'm like, but you're only going back 80 years.
Sure.
If we go back 4,000 years, this is Israel's land.
Right.
So I'm like, I'm not sure who has a claim on this because if you take even that, like, the original owner of the land theory of things, it's like, okay, well, once again, it's like, who do you want to assign the original owner of that land?
How far back you want to go?
How far? Yeah.
When do you want to stop? When do you want to pause history to say, at this is the point we're going to pause and pluck out and say that's when to go? You know? Yeah.
But it's like, but Israel currently it occupies that land. Like it's their land.
Right.
It was given to them once again by the UN. They tried to fight wars for it, and Israel won. I'm like, what else? What else do you need to see that is their land?
Right.
At this point.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's and I think, and we talked about this way back when we dealt with the just war theory, but Christian tradition has maintained over its history that their war is never good. It's never desirable.
Right.
But there is a way that it can be just. That the least bad option of a list of bad options.
Right.
And so in our fallen world, there is war.
Yeah.
The ceasing of war is called the new heavens and the new earth.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen until then.
Yeah.
And so,
peace doesn't just magically spring from the ground.
Right.
Like peace doesn't magically spring from history. We talked about this last time too. It's like the only way to stop evil people from doing evil things is to stop them.
Right.
And that's not. There are some very bad wars where it's just like maybe two evil people going at each other for evil reasons. But sometimes it's like World War II. Like you stop the Nazis because they were doing evil things,
right?
And it was good to go to war with them,
right?
To stop the evil.
Yes. Yeah. That was out of the list of horrible options. That was the least horrible one,
right?
And I would say was actually a moral good to stop evil like that. So I think it was interesting. The other day there was a press conference at the White House, and John Kirby was addressing some questions, and that's what he said. He's like, "Look, guys, I don't know what to tell you. This is war. War is bloody. It's horrible. It's awful. Innocent people are going to get hurt. And I'm not telling you that that's good or that that's acceptable or that we're okay with that. I'm just telling you that is what it is." And I do think sometimes that we have so kind of got this like utopia lens that we put on. Of course we want peace. Of course we should pray for peace.
Yeah.
But there are times where there's a season for war, and it's awful, and it's just tragic and terrible on so many levels, and yet sometimes it's still just.
Yeah.
And so that's complex, and we don't like complex things,
yeah.
But it is what it is.
Yeah, and it's just like we've been. We already said we're like on the lean Israel camp.
Sure.
Right. But part of it too that's interesting is if like that Egypt-Jordan coalition had like defeated Israel in 1948, I don't know if I would sit here and be like, give Israel that land back. I'm like,
No.
Well, they won.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's like you just let history play itself out.
Yeah.
I also want to say
Yeah.
I'm sure if there's Palestinian Arabs living in Israel-controlled land, maybe they are treated as secondary citizens. I don't know. I've never been there.
Sure.
I don't know if you saw that in Israel or not. I can imagine it happening. It's not like the Jewish people are completely all loving, no hate, and whatever.
Sure. There are guilty parties on both sides.
Yeah, and we need to call it evil where it is,
Yeah.
right? If there is true oppression from Israel to Palestinian Arabs living in their country, like we would say that's bad. Like
Sure.
we
Sure.
need to call that out too.
Mm-hmm.
But we say this, we said this last time and I believe this, if Palestine lays down their guns, we've not seen anything in this historical timeline that Israel's going to go like bomb Gaza for no reason.
Right.
And
right.
try to take
Correct.
that land. And
Correct.
They're not trying to expand their territory
Right.
here. If like Hamas lays down their guns, if these terrorists lay down these guns, these organizations trying to be at war, or these countries want to be at war with Israel,
Mm-hmm.
I think there will be peace in the region.
Yep.
But if Israel disarms themselves, I think they're obliterated within a year.
Right. There's no Israel.
There's no Israel.
Yep.
And so from that perspective, they're like, what am I supposed to do?
Yep.
Right. And once again, logically, I can logically get there with
Yeah.
that.
It's also interesting just to reflect on all this drama, 4,000 years of drama. Comes back to two brothers.
Yeah.
And, from Isaac comes the Jewish people and Christians, and from Ishmael comes Muslims.
Right.
And it's kind of like, come on, Abraham. You had to sleep with Hagar? Really? But it is like we've talked about how sin has collateral damage and affects people.
Yeah.
I mean, gosh, think about the kind of far-reaching effects of that decision that we see today. It's nuts.
At the same time, it makes me think like this was, 20 verses in one chapter of the Bible that explained 4,000 years of history in that region.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's another reason. It is like confirmation to me that I can trust the Bible as the word of God.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was pretty amazing to think that. It's like you just point at Genesis 21, and you're like, well, here we go.
Yep. Yeah. And then you mentioned before, I just think this is such a beautiful way to close, that really you think this is really why Christianity is the only answer.
So as I thought about this, the Christian worldview, what we see in the gospel, that Jesus died for our sin, lived the perfect life, died for our sins, and rose defeating Satan, sin, and death, and restoring relationships with him, is the only answer. And it's because, what does this all come down to? This is my land.
Sure.
This is about, like, it's mine. Like, and if you wronged me in the past, you know what? I'll never forget that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and so that, what is this conflict, this hatred? It's like, this hatred is just so rooted generation to generation.
Yeah.
That's my land. And then when you wrong me, I'm going to wrong you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's two things in Christianity I think that really gives a actual solution here. First, we see in Philippians where it says, but our citizenship is in heaven.
Yeah.
Christians can say, you know what? If you wrong me and take my land, there might be on a practical level as you live here that, okay, like it's fine for countries to take territory and, history will play out.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, we know this isn't even my home.
Right.
My home is in heaven.
Yeah, that's
right?
good.
If you have that view, you can start to say, okay, the land, if you live in Palestine, that region, I'm sure you're hearing this and thinking, absolutely insane. But
we got a lot of listeners in Palestine, don't we?
It's just a different way to
for sure,
to view it, and that's what
sure.
I'm saying. Christianity replaces our old worldview.
Yep.
It gives us a new worldview to say, you know what, this physical land is not my home. The spiritual land in heaven, that is my home.
Well said.
The second is because Christianity is the only religion that really preaches grace and forgiveness, that you can take on. Jesus took on our sin, which he did not commit, and to give us his righteousness. Christianity is the only religion that gives us this grace that allows us to take on the wrongs that have been done to us and to show forgiveness and to show grace to people. And I told you the story about my grandparents, who my grandma was incredibly wealthy in China in the early 1900s. I didn't find out this recently. I'm like, man, if the communist revolutions never happened, I'm like a prince or something.
I would know you. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm thankful to be here though. But the CCP came and just took all of my grandparents' land and all this stuff. And I was telling you, if we go to like original land, I'm like, do they owe me that land?
Right.
And the reason that I'm not angry, like, you owe me this, like, we should go back and like go take it. Well, first of all, even if that were true, would me causing terrorist acts in that land that my family used to own, would that be right? Of course not.
Yeah.
And I was saying, well, look, if Taiwan, the people who escaped CCP, want to declare formal war, that's one thing. Taiwan probably get obliterated, so that's a bad idea. I would suggest you don't do that. And then you bring the U.S. into it. Anyways, geopolitical.
World War III. Yeah.
But the second is, why did I not grow up believing in hatred of those people, what they did to my grandparents? It's because my grandparents became Christians.
Amen.
And my grandma taught my mom, who taught us. It's like we had so much wealth in China, wealth that I have never seen or understood, right? But she just would say, this is why you don't store up treasures on earth.
Wow.
This is why you store up treasures in heaven. And that was her view.
Incredible.
She didn't hold that hatred to say, we deserve that land, we needed to take all this stuff back, because she said, she was able to forgive because, one, she understood the forgiveness that Christ gave her.
Beautiful.
But then also, secondly, she understood our treasure is in heaven. It's not even on earth.
Yeah.
So it's not like we need to go take all that back and to hate them for whatever. This is why it's important that you don't love money. That's what they taught me growing up, my mom and my grandma. And
it's amazing.
And I'm like, okay.
That's amazing.
Why do I think Christianity is the solution here? Imagine if everyone understood and was transformed by the gospel in that way, and that's how people related to each other. That's the only way you can forgive 4,000 years of
Amen.
Trauma and war.
Amen.
You know what I mean? Because if you just take the normal secular view of like an eye for an eye and all this stuff, I mean, this is what you get.
Yep.
Right? Where you think that your citizenship on earth, your land on earth is more important than your citizenship in heaven. That's how you keep these things going on.
Yeah.
So,
well said. What a great reminder for us as we conclude this podcast this week. We'll be back next week to ask the question, okay, so we've seen historically how this is all played out, but what about biblically? God gave Abraham that land. So does the state of Israel, the modern state of Israel, do they have a divine right to that land? So that's what we're going to conquer next week, and we look forward to talking to you then.